The woman in the wheelchair didn't see it coming. Nobody did. Terminal C at Vancouver International was loud that Tuesday morning. Not the good kind of loud, not the hum of a city going somewhere. It was the kind of loud that came from too many people packed into too little space. Half of them irritable, none of them patient. Flight delays rippled down the departure board like dominoes. Gate agents smiled with their mouths and not their eyes. A child cried somewhere near gate 14, and nobody turned to look. Judith sat near the window. She had positioned herself carefully, the way she always did in public spaces, close enough to an outlet to charge her phone, far enough from the main walkway that people wouldn't bump into her chair without warning. She was 53 years old, a former occupational therapist from Kelowna, who had spent 26 years helping other people learn to navigate the world after injury. Then a drunk driver on Highway 97 had turned her into her own patient. That was 4 years ago. She had made peace with most of it, some mornings more than others. Her flight to Halifax didn't leave for 2 hours. She had a book in her lap, a worn paperback she'd already read twice, and a coffee going cold in the cup holder clipped to her armrest. Outside, the mountains were buried in cloud. She watched a plane taxi slow across the tarmac and disappear into the gray. She didn't notice the man in the corner until the dog moved. He was sitting 3 seats down from the window wall, in the row that faced the gate. Big through the shoulders in civilian clothes, dark jeans, a gray canvas jacket, boots that had seen real miles. He had the kind of stillness that didn't come from relaxation. It came from training. His hands rested on his knees. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't watching the departure board. He was just sitting, which was its own unusual thing in an airport, where everyone was always pretending to be somewhere else already. The dog lay at his feet, a German shepherd, large and dark-saddled, with a working harness that was clean and worn in equal measure. The dog wasn't sleeping. It was watching the terminal the way its handler was, quietly, without urgency, taking in everything. Every few minutes it would shift its head slightly, ears tracking a sound across the room, then settle again. A yellow vest on the harness read Surface Animal. Below that, Do Not Pet. His name was Sergeant Wade Callum, but the name tag meant nothing in Terminal C. He was 38 years old. He had been a Navy SEAL for 12 of those years, and for the last 3 he had worked alongside this dog, a Belgian-blooded German shepherd named Kodiak, through 2 overseas rotations and 1 training deployment that nobody talked about at dinner tables. He was home on leave. He was taking the red-eye to see his sister in Halifax. He had booked the cheapest seat available and packed 1 bag. He had not expected anything to happen. That is the nature of things that happen. The Hargrove family arrived at Gate C-14 like a weather system. There were 4 of them. The father, Clifton, came first, a wide man in a pressed blue shirt, pulling a carry-on with one hand and speaking loudly into his phone with the other. He was the kind of man who expected rooms to reorganize themselves around him, and in his experience, they usually did. He ran a real estate development firm based in West Vancouver. His picture had been in Vancouver magazine twice. He believed this was relevant information in most situations. Behind him came his wife, Ingrid, thin, pale, wearing sunglasses indoors, which in Terminal C was not a fashion statement but a mood one. She said nothing. She had learned over 17 years of marriage that saying nothing was the most efficient form of protest available to her. Their son, Tanner, was 22. He had just graduated from a university his father had donated a building to. He wore his entitlement the way some people wore cologne. Too much, in enclosed spaces, so that everyone nearby noticed whether they wanted to or not. He walked ahead of his mother and behind his father and looked at his phone constantly. Their daughter, Sienna, was 19. She was the loudest of them, in a different way. Not aggressive, just careless. The way someone is careless when they have never been required to be careful. She laughed at something on her phone, and the laugh carried. They moved through the terminal and stopped at the gate seating area. Clifton looked at the available chairs. Looked at them the way a man looks at a parking lot, assessing what he was owed. There was a row of 4 seats open near the window. Good seats. The ones with the view and the outlet access. Judith was in the aisle beside them, her wheelchair parallel to the chairs, taking up the space where a 5th seat might have been. Clifton looked at her. He looked at the space. He looked at her again. "Excuse me," he said. Judith looked up from her book. "You're taking up quite a bit of space here." He gestured at the area around her chair. "My family needs to sit together. We're on a long flight." Judith looked at the 4 empty seats beside her. "There's a whole row right there," she said. "I'm not in any of them. Your chair is blocking the aisle." "My chair is in the accessible space." "That's what it's for." Clifton's expression shifted in the small way expressions shift when a man who expects compliance doesn't receive it. "I'm sure there's somewhere more out of the way you could go." "I'm sure there isn't," Judith said. She looked back at her book. Tanner had been listening. He stepped forward, close enough that Judith would have had to crane her neck to look up at him properly. He didn't say anything. He just stood there in that specific way, using his body as a sentence. "Tanner," Ingrid said quietly. He ignored her. Sienna had looked up from her phone. "Just move it back a bit," Tanner said. "Like 6 inches. You're not even using that space." "I'm using this space," Judith said. "I'm sitting in it. There are people who actually need—" "I am people," she said. That was when Clifton reached forward and put his hand on the back of her wheelchair. He didn't shove it. Not exactly. It was more like a shoves polite older relative. A firm, deliberate push. The kind that moves something without technically qualifying as an assault, if you were the kind of person who thought carefully about what qualified. The chair rolled back 3 feet on the smooth terminal floor. Judith's book fell. Her coffee tipped and didn't spill, but only because it was nearly empty. The chair stopped when it hit the row of seats behind her. Judith sat very still. There are moments in public spaces, in airports, in grocery stores, in any room where strangers are briefly forced to share the same air, when something happens that everyone sees, and no one knows what to do with. This was one of those moments. The travelers nearby went quiet in that specific way that isn't silence. Conversations that taper, heads that don't quite turn, the collective awkward performance of having noticed nothing. Clifton was already turning back to his family. Judith's hands were on her wheels. Her knuckles were white. She would not cry. She had decided that a long time ago about moments like this one. But the shaking, she couldn't stop. Wade had watched all of it. He hadn't moved during the conversation. He'd watched the way you watch a developing situation, cataloging it, assessing threat levels, waiting. This was not indifference. This was the kind of attention that most people can't sustain, and he had spent years learning to weaponize. When the chair moved, he stood up. Kodiak stood up with him. They crossed the terminal in 10 seconds. Wade didn't hurry. Hurrying was for people who hadn't decided yet. He had decided. He came to stand beside Judith's chair. He looked at Clifton. "That was her space," Wade said. His voice was level, not loud, the kind of voice that doesn't need volume to be heard. Clifton turned. He registered Wade's size, registered the dog, made the calculation that large men with large dogs were still manageable when you had money and the right tone. "Stay out of this," Clifton said. "This is a private matter." "You pushed a woman's wheelchair," Wade said. "In a public terminal. There's nothing private about that. The space is needed. She was in the way. She was in the accessible zone. That's hers by law." Tanner stepped up beside his father. "Who are you supposed to be?" Wade looked at him. Just looked. No aggression, no posturing. Just the calm, direct, slightly too long look of a man who has been in enough genuinely dangerous places that Tanner Hargrove, 19 feet from a pretzel kiosk in Vancouver International, did not register as a complicating factor. Tanner looked away first. "She needs to be somewhere else," Clifton said. "She's staying where she is," Wade said. "And you're going to sit down, you can't tell me." Kodiak shifted. Not aggressively. The dog hadn't made a sound. But it moved. A subtle repositioning of weight, a change in posture, the way a river changes when something upstream moves. Every person in the immediate vicinity noticed it. Clifton noticed it. He sat down. Not because he was afraid, exactly, because the math had shifted in a way he didn't like. There is a particular kind of courage that has nothing to do with strength. It is the courage of continuing to occupy space after someone has tried to remove you from it. Judith had been exercising that courage for 4 years. She was very tired of having to. Wade turned to Judith. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," she said. "Then no, I'm not actually. But thank you." He nodded. He picked up her paperback from the floor without being asked and handed it back to her. She looked at the cover, a mystery novel, dog-eared to page 214, and then at him. "What's your dog's name?" "Kodiak," Wade said. "Can I?" "He's working right now," Wade said. Then, after a pause, "When we're at the gate." "Maybe." He went back to his seat. Kodiak settled at his feet again. The terminal noise resumed, as terminal noise does, folding itself back over the moment like water over a dropped stone. Clifton's jaw was tight. He said nothing to his family. Tanner was back on his phone. Sienna was watching Wade with an expression that, for the first time that morning, wasn't careless. 12 minutes passed. Then Clifton stood up and walked to the gate agent desk. He spoke quietly. The agent listened. Glanced once in Wade's direction. Listened some more, picked up a phone. 5 minutes after that, 2 airport security officers appeared at gate C-14. They were both younger than Wade. They approached him with the specific energy of people who had been told something was wrong but hadn't been told what, and were working hard to look like they knew what they were doing. "Sir," the first one said, "we've received a complaint about a disturbance." Wade looked up at them. He was still sitting. Kodiak's ears went back, then forward. "From who?" Wade said. "We're not able to say. But there's been a complaint of threatening behavior involving an animal." "The animal is a certified military working dog," Wade said. "He's been lying on the floor for the past 40 minutes. Sir, we need you to come with us." Wade looked at Clifton, who was watching from his chair with the expression of a man who has submitted a claim and is waiting to see if it pays out. Then Wade stood. He stood the way he did everything, without waste, without theater. He clipped Kodiak's leash. He picked up his bag. "Kodiak comes with me," he said. "The dog will need to be. He comes with me," Wade repeated. "He's a certified military working dog under the Canadian Forces program. Separating us is a violation of his handler protocols. If you'd like to call the base at Esquimalt, they'll confirm that." The officers looked at each other. "We'll figure that out at the security office," the first one said. They walked Wade out of gate C-14 in front of everyone. Judith watched them go. She pulled out her phone. What Clifton Hargrove did not know. What he had not bothered to find out, because men like Clifton rarely bothered, was that Judith Marchand had spent 26 years helping people navigate systems that didn't account for them. She knew every ombudsman's number for every major airport in Canada. She had sat on 3 accessibility advisory committees at the provincial level. She had testified before a House of Commons subcommittee on public transit accommodation in 2021. She was quiet. She was patient. She was spectacularly well connected. She also knew a reporter. His name was Patrick, and he worked for CBC. He was not the kind of reporter who chased ambulances. He was the kind who had been waiting for the right story to move on an accountability piece about airport accessibility enforcement, a piece he'd been trying to get past his editor for 8 months. He was on the next flight out of gate B7. Judith texted him. He was at C-14 in 4 minutes. She told him what had happened. He listened. He looked at the empty chair where Wade had been sitting. He asked if she'd be willing to talk on record. "When he gets back," she said. "If he gets back," Patrick said. "When?" she said. In the security office, Wade answered every question asked of him. He did this with precision, not volunteering information, not withholding it. The way a man answers questions when he knows the truth is structurally in his favor, and patience is the only tool required. He told the officers his name, his rank, his unit. He gave them the contact number for his CO, which they wrote down and did not call immediately, which he noted. They had put Kodiak in a side room, a room with a crate. Wade had not raised his voice about this. He had stated, once, clearly, that it was a violation of the working animal protocol, and that this would be addressed. Then he had let it go, because some things you do not win in the moment. You win them later, in the rooms where records are kept. He sat and waited. The first call came 17 minutes later, not from the officer's supervisor, but from the Transport Canada Accessibility Compliance Desk, which had received a formal written complaint from a Judith Marchand, time-stamped 12 minutes ago, citing Section 172 of the Canada Transportation Act and requesting an immediate investigation into the handling of an accessible zone incident at Vancouver International, Gate C14, and the subsequent detention of a witness. The second call came 6 minutes after that, from Esquimalt Naval Base, confirming that Petty Officer First Class Wade Callum was an active duty member of Canadian Special Operations Forces, currently on approved leave, and that military working dog Kodiak was his assigned partner under CANSOFCOM protocol, and was not to be housed separately from his handler except under specific enumerated conditions, none of which applied here. The officers, to their credit, did not make Wade wait after that. They brought Kodiak back first. The dog walked directly to Wade and sat at his left foot and looked up at him. Wade put one hand on the dog's head, briefly, and didn't say anything, and if you were watching carefully you would have noticed that his shoulders went down a half-inch, and that this was the first time they had. There is a particular kind of man who believes that his money makes him correct, not just comfortable, not just powerful, correct, as though wealth were a form of accuracy, as though the market had already decided who was right, and that decision happened to have his face. Clifton Hargrove believed this. He believed it all the way to the gate. He believed it through boarding, through the pre-flight safety demonstration, through the first hour of the flight to Halifax, during which he ordered a scotch and watched the clouds below and felt the specific satisfaction of a man who has solved a problem. He stopped believing it somewhere over the Rockies. His phone should have been off. He had put it in airplane mode out of habit, but he had also, out of a habit he wouldn't admit to, opened the airline's Wi-Fi portal before the flight left. The connection was slow, but it worked well enough to load a CBC News push notification. The headline read, "Military dog removed from airport gate after veteran intervenes in wheelchair incident. Accessibility advocates call for airport response." The byline was Patrick Hetu. The article had been published 47 minutes ago. It had 12,000 shares. Clifton's picture was in it. Not a good one. A screenshot from the terminal's security footage, which the reporter had submitted an access request for, and received with unusual speed, given that a federal compliance complaint had already been filed. In the picture, Clifton's hand was on the back of Judith's wheelchair. The image quality was sufficient. He read the article twice. Tanner had fallen asleep. Ingrid was looking out the window. Sienna was watching him. "Dad," she said quietly. He said nothing. "Dad, I want you to know I'm going to tell the truth about what happened." He turned to look at her. She had her mother's eyes. She had her father's chin. She was 19 years old, and for the first time in her life, she was looking at him in a way that was not quite looking at her father. "Sienna," he started. "I saw what you did," she said, "and I'm going to say that I saw it." When they asked, Ingrid was still looking out the window, but her hands, folded in her lap, went very still. Wade had not known about the article when he rebooked his seat and returned to Gate C14. He had known about the complaint Judith filed. She had texted him a copy while he was still in the security office, because she was efficient and thorough, and she had known he would want to see it. He had read it on his phone, noted the relevant statutes, and approved of the framing. He had not expected Patrick Hetu to be standing beside her when he got back. He did not love this. He said as much quietly to Judith. "He's going to write the story either way," she said. "You can be in it accurately or not in it at all." And then they fill in the blanks. Wade considered this. He looked at Patrick. "I'll tell you what I observed," he said. "I won't characterize it." "That's fine," Patrick said. "The footage characterizes it." The boarding announcement for their Halifax flight came 40 minutes later. They boarded together, Wade, Kodiak, and Judith, through the accessible boarding door that the gate agent opened without being asked, because 3 separate airline supervisors had been briefed in the last hour, and nobody wanted to be in a second article. The Hargroves were already seated when they came on board. Clifton did not look up. Tanner did. He looked at Wade, and then at Kodiak, and then at the floor, in that order. He was very young. And the thing about being very young is that sometimes you can still be reached. Kodiak walked past them without acknowledgement. He was a professional. What followed, over the next 3 weeks, was not dramatic in the way that airport terminals are dramatic. It was the slower, more thorough drama of institutions accounting for themselves. Transport Canada completed its accessibility compliance review in 11 days. The findings confirmed a violation of the Canadian Transportation Agency's accessibility standards at Gate C14 and recommended mandatory retraining for the gate security staff who had responded, as well as a formal review of the airport's accessible zone enforcement policies. The 2 security officers were not fired. They were retrained. This was the correct outcome, in Wade's view, and he said so when asked. The formal complaint against Clifton was harder to resolve, because what he had done, moving a wheelchair without consent, occupied an uncomfortable gray zone in the existing code. The complaint did not go to criminal court. It went instead to the Canadian Transportation Agency's dispute resolution process, where a mediator spent 4 hours with Judith, and a lawyer hired by Clifton's firm, and produced an agreement that Judith accepted because it included a formal apology, a contribution to the disability advocacy organization she chaired, and a clause that Clifton had pushed back on for 6 of those 4 hours, his name, in writing, acknowledging what he had done. He signed it. His lawyer had advised him that the alternative was worse. Sienna had already given her statement, not because anyone had forced her to, because she had decided to. She had done this quietly, through Judith's lawyer, without telling her father until after it was filed. The article Patrick published, a longer one, the accountability piece he had been waiting 8 months to write, ran in the weekend edition. It was picked up nationally. It named the gaps in enforcement. It quoted Judith on what it meant to occupy accessible space, not as a courtesy, but as a right. It quoted Wade on what it meant to intervene, which he had not wanted to say much about, but had said this: "I didn't do anything unusual. I just didn't decide it wasn't my business." That line was the one people shared. There are things that stay with you after moments like that one. Not always the big things. Sometimes the smallest ones. Judith remembered the sound of her book hitting the floor. She remembered the way her hands shook, and she could not make them stop. She remembered being ashamed of the shaking, and then being angry at the shame, and then deciding, somewhere on the flight over the prairies, that the shaking had been correct. Her body had known what happened before her mind could articulate it. That wasn't weakness. That was honesty. She framed the Transport Canada letter and put it on her wall, not because it proved anything she hadn't already known, but because it was evidence, and evidence mattered, and she had spent years helping other people understand that the world was required, legally, morally, structurally required, to make room for them. Wade did not frame anything. He finished his leave in Halifax. He ate his sister's cooking and walked Kodiak along the waterfront at dawn and slept in a real bed, and didn't think much about Vancouver. When Patrick's article came out, his sister texted him a link. He read it once. He noticed that his quote was accurate. He put his phone down and went to make coffee. Kodiak was already at the door. They went out into the morning, the man and the dog, walking the way they always walked. In sync, unhurried, the leash loose between them. The harbor was flat and gray, and cold and beautiful, in the specific way that cold, beautiful things are beautiful. Not asking anything from you, not trying to be seen. Just there. Wade watched a ferry cross the water. He thought about Judith's hands on the wheels of her chair, steady by the time they'd boarded. He thought about Sienna Hargrove's voice on the plane, quiet and certain. He thought about Kodiak returning to the room and sitting at his foot, without being asked, because that was what Kodiak did. He came back, every time, to where he was supposed to be. Some things, Wade thought, are exactly as simple as they seem. He turned and walked back toward the city. Kodiak walked beside him, ears up, watching the morning arrive. The narrator will not tell you this was a perfect ending. Perfect endings belong to places that don't exist. What happened at Vancouver International on a Tuesday in February was a small moment in a large world. And the world did not stop for it. But Judith Marchand made her flight. And the accessible zone at Gate C-14 was properly marked and staffed for the first time in 3 years, starting the following month. And somewhere over Lake Superior, at 37,000 feet, a 19-year-old named Sienna looked out a window at clouds that went on forever, and felt for the first time she could name the uncomfortable weight of being complicit, and the lighter, stranger feeling of having chosen not to be. That is not nothing, that is in fact quite a lot.